When he woke up, the world was the same. But no one remembered him. The morning light filtered through the Venetian blinds, casting zebra-striped shadows across James Walker's bedroom wall. Everything seemed normal, the faint hum of his neighbor's air conditioning unit, the distant sound of traffic on Madison Avenue, even the coffee machine's automated brewing sequence in his kitchen. He stretched, ran his fingers through his disheveled dark hair, and checked his phone, 7:15 a.m., right on schedule. The first hint that something was wrong came when his phone showed no notifications. No morning texts from his sister Sarah about their weekly dinner plans, no emails from work, not even the usual spam. He dismissed it as a glitch and headed to the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face and staring at his reflection in the mirror. Same blue eyes, same 3-day stubble he'd been meaning to shave, same small scar above his right eyebrow from a childhood accident. James worked as a data analyst at Meridian Solutions, a mid-sized consulting firm in Manhattan. He'd been there for 5 years, long enough to know everyone's coffee preferences and weekend plans. The security guard, Mike, always greeted him with a nod and a "Morning, Jim." But today, Mike's eyes slid past him like he was examining the wallpaper. "ID, please," Mike said, his voice professionally detached. James laughed, but the sound died in his throat when he saw Mike's expression. "Come on, Mike. It's me, James. 5th floor, data analytics." Mike's hand drifted toward his radio. "Sir, I need to see your ID or I'll have to ask you to leave." With trembling fingers, James reached for his wallet. The familiar leather felt wrong somehow, too stiff, as if it were brand new. When he pulled out his driver's license, his heart stopped. The photo wasn't his. The name read, Thomas Richardson. But the address, that was his apartment. There must be some mistake, James muttered, more to himself than to Mike. He fumbled with his phone, pulling up his company email. The screen showed an error message, account not found. "Sir." Mike's voice had an edge now. "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside." James backed away from the security desk, his mind racing. He needed to think, needed to understand what was happening. He'd grab a coffee, clear his head, figure this out. But when he reached for his credit card at the cafe across the street, every single one had a different name on it. The barista looked at him strangely when he abandoned his order and rushed out. His footsteps echoed on the sidewalk as he practically ran back to his apartment building. The doorman, who'd known him for 3 years, gave him the same blank look Mike had. James took the elevator to the 12th floor, his hands shaking as he tried his key in the lock of 12B. It didn't work. From inside, he could hear the sound of children laughing, the clatter of dishes, the ordinary sounds of a family's morning routine. He pressed his forehead against the door, trying to steady his breathing. That's when he remembered the message. Last night, just before bed, a text from an unknown number, "Are you ready to start over?" He dismissed it as spam, hadn't even bothered to delete it. Now, frantically scrolling through his phone, he couldn't find it. His message history was empty, his contact list blank. His social media accounts didn't exist. According to his phone's settings, this was its first day of use. Sarah. His sister would remember him. She had to. They'd grown up together in that small house in New Jersey, shared secrets and dreams and the pain of losing their parents. She lived in Brooklyn now, a brownstone in Park Slope she'd bought with her husband 2 years ago. The subway ride felt endless. James kept catching glimpses of his reflection in the windows, checking to make sure he was still there, still himself. Other passengers shifted away from him slightly, perhaps sensing his growing panic. His sister's street looked the same, tree-lined, peaceful, children's bikes chained to front railings. Sarah's house was third from the corner, its red brick familiar and reassuring. James's hand shook as he pressed the doorbell. The door opened, and there she was, same curly hair, same green eyes they'd both inherited from their mother. For a moment, hope surged through him. Then he saw it, the flash of recognition in her eyes, followed immediately by fear. Pure, bone-deep fear. "You can't be here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're not supposed to, you can't." "Sarah, please," James stepped forward, but she recoiled. "It's me, it's James. Your brother." "I don't have a brother." The words hit him like physical blows. "But I've seen you before. In my dreams. Or somewhere." She was shaking now, one hand gripping the doorframe. "You need to go. Please. Don't come back." "Sarah, wait." The door slammed shut. James stood there, his hand raised to knock again, but the sound of multiple locks clicking into place stopped him. Through the door, he could hear Sarah's rapid breathing, then her hurried footsteps retreating deeper into the house. He sank down onto her front steps, his mind spinning. Sarah had recognized him, not as her brother, but from somewhere else. "Dreams," she'd said. What did that mean? And that fear in her eyes, it wasn't the fear of a stranger. It was the fear of something familiar, something she'd hoped never to see again. His phone buzzed in his pocket, making him jump. Unknown number. His hands trembled as he answered. "Hello. Interesting, isn't it?" The voice was neither male nor female, digitally altered to sound almost mechanical. How fragile identity can be. "Who are you? What's happening to me?" "Wrong question, Mr. Walker. You should be asking, what did you do to make this happen?" The line went dead. James stared at the screen until it went dark, then immediately tried to call back. The number was already disconnected. He needed to think systematically. He was a data analyst, after all, his job was to find patterns, to make sense of chaos. First step, gather information. He pulled out his wallet again, spreading its contents on his knee. Credit cards, library card, gym membership, all in different names. The driver's license belonging to Thomas Richardson had his apartment's address, but the birth date was wrong, October 15, 1988. James had been born in April. Second step, establish a timeline. Yesterday had been completely normal. He'd gone to work, had lunch with colleagues, chicken Caesar salad and an iced tea, worked on the Morrison account until 6, then picked up Chinese takeout on his way home. He'd watched 2 episodes of that new streaming series about cold cases, taken a shower, and gone to bed. The mysterious text had come just before midnight. His phone buzzed again, another unknown number. "Don't ignore the signs, James. You've been through this before." Before? What did that mean? He tried to think back further than yesterday, and that's when he noticed something strange. His memories felt superficial. Like a story he'd memorized rather than lived. He could remember facts about his life, where he went to college, his first job, his parents' deaths in a car accident 10 years ago, but the emotional texture was missing. No smell of his mother's perfume, no sound of his father's laugh. He needed proof of his existence. The library card in his wallet, bearing yet another name, was for the New York Public Library. Their main branch wasn't far. Maybe he could find old newspapers, yearbooks, anything to prove he was real. The famous stone lions guarded the library's entrance as they had for over a century. Inside, the reading room was nearly empty, just a few students and researchers scattered among the long wooden tables. James approached the reference desk, where an elderly librarian peered at him over wire-rimmed glasses. "How can I help you?" "I need to look at newspapers from the past few years. And maybe some high school yearbooks from New Jersey." "Milburn High School, class of 2006. The librarian, her name tag read Mrs. Chen, helped him locate the materials. The yearbook came first. James flipped through the pages with growing dread. He wasn't there. Not in any of the class photos, not in clubs or sports teams. Even the theater production he distinctly remembered starring in, Our Town, senior year, showed someone else in his role. The newspapers were worse. The article about his parents' accident was there, but it mentioned only one child, Sarah. There was no trace of James Walker anywhere. Finding everything okay? Mrs. Chen had appeared at his elbow. Yes, James paused. Something about her expression made him look closer. Like Sarah, there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes, quickly hidden. Have we met before? She adjusted her glasses, her hands trembling slightly. I don't believe so. Though. She glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers, then leaned closer. You remind me of someone who used to come here. Every day, same seat, researching the same things you are now. But that was. When? I can't quite remember. It's strange, like trying to recall a dream. He was looking for himself too, I think. Or maybe I'm confused. Sometimes at my age. She straightened up, professional demeanor returning. Will you need anything else? James was about to press her further when his phone buzzed again. This time it was a text. The library won't help. You already tried that. Multiple times. He looked up sharply, scanning the reading room. The students were absorbed in their work. No one was watching him. No one except Mrs. Chen, who had retreated behind her desk but was staring at him with that same mixture of recognition and unease. Another text arrived, ready for the truth. Corner of West 4th and Jones. 1 hour. Come alone. James checked the time, 2:45 p.m. He had an hour to decide whether to follow this mysterious lead or continue his own investigation. But what choice did he really have? Every conventional path had led to the same conclusion: according to the world, James Walker didn't exist. The village was busy at this hour, students from NYU mixing with tourists and locals on the narrow streets. James arrived at West 4th and Jones 15 minutes early, positioning himself where he could observe all approaches to the intersection. His analytical mind kicked in, cataloging details: delivery guy on a bike, third time passed, possibly surveillance, woman with red umbrella, standing too still, watching too carefully, teenager with headphones, keeps adjusting an earpiece, could be communicating. At exactly 3:45, his phone buzzed: coffee shop behind you. Order an Americano. Say it's for Thomas. The name from his driver's license. James's pulse quickened as he entered the small cafe. The barista, a young woman with bright blue hair, didn't bat an eye at the name. That'll be $4.75. When he reached for his wallet, she shook her head. Already paid for. And there's a note for you. She slid a folded piece of paper across the counter with his coffee. The handwriting was his own. Dear James. If you're reading this, it's happened again. I know you have questions. I had them too. Still do. But here's what you need to know. 1. You're not crazy. You existed yesterday, last week, last year. But sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the world resets. Everyone forgets. Except Sarah. She remembers pieces, which is why she's so afraid. 2. It's not random. It happens when you get too close. 3. By now you've noticed your memories feel thin. That's because they're not all yours. Some belong to the other Jameses, the ones who came before. We're all you, but we're also different. Each time this happens, you change a little. 4. There's a pattern. Find it before they. The note ended there, mid-sentence. James looked up sharply. The blue-haired barista was watching him with open curiosity now. Everything okay? She asked. You look like you've seen a ghost. The person who left this note, when? She frowned. That's the weird thing. I just started my shift, but that note was here waiting. My manager said it was important, but she doesn't remember who left it. James's coffee had grown cold. He took a sip anyway, needing the normalcy of the action. The bitter liquid helped clear his head. Think. Analyze. Pattern recognition, that was his specialty. He pulled out his phone and opened the Notes app. Something about seeing his thoughts in neat, digital rows helped him think. Known facts. 1. Until today, he had a normal life. 2. All evidence of that life has vanished. 3. Sarah recognizes him but is terrified. 4. The librarian had seen him before. 5. According to the note, this is cyclical. 6. Each reset is triggered by getting too close. Too close to what? His phone buzzed again. Unknown number, getting warmer. But you're still asking the wrong questions. What happened 3 months ago? 3 months ago? James closed his eyes, trying to remember. Work had been normal. No major life events. Except. His eyes snapped open. The Morrison account. The one he'd been working on yesterday. 3 months ago, he'd noticed something strange in the numbers. A pattern of transactions that didn't quite add up. He'd flagged it for review, but his supervisor had told him to drop it. Another text, now you're remembering. But it goes deeper. Check your left shoulder. James felt a chill run down his spine. Slowly, he pulled his collar aside. There, just below his shoulder blade, was a small scar he'd never noticed before. No, not a scar, numbers, faintly raised like an old burn, 23-17-40. The blue-haired barista was definitely watching him now. And she wasn't the only one. A man in a business suit at the window table had stopped pretending to read his newspaper. A couple near the door had gone suspiciously still. Another text, run. James didn't hesitate. He bolted for the back of the cafe, shouldering through the door marked employees only. He could hear shouts behind him, the scrape of chairs being pushed back too quickly. The back door opened onto an alley, and he took off running, his analyst's mind automatically mapping possible escape routes. Right on Bleecker, left on Morton, through the community garden he didn't know existed but somehow remembered perfectly. Behind him, footsteps echoed off brick walls. Multiple pursuers, trying to herd him in a specific direction. He cut through a restaurant's outdoor seating area, knocking over empty chairs to slow them down. His phone buzzed continuously now, a stream of messages. You can't escape them. Not this time. Not any time. But you can change the pattern. Change the pattern. The numbers on his shoulder, 23-17-40. Not a date. Not coordinates. A sequence. And suddenly he knew, really knew, not just remembered, that he'd had this realization before. Many times before. The pursuit was closing in. James ran harder, his breath coming in gasps. He needed to think, needed to break the cycle. What was different this time? What had changed in the pattern? Sarah's words echoed in his mind, I've seen you before. In my dreams. Not dreams. Memories. Fragments that survived each reset. And if they survived, other things might have too. Evidence. Proof. A way to break the pattern. James cut down another alley, his footsteps echoing off wet concrete. A chain-link fence blocked the far end, but he'd somehow known it would be there. Just as he knew, without knowing how he knew, that the fence had a gap behind the dumpster on the left. He squeezed through just as his pursuers reached the alley's entrance. Their footsteps slowed, became more measured. They weren't worried about losing him. They knew where he was going. Because he'd gone there before. His phone vibrated again, every time, you run. Every time, you hide. Every time, you try to solve it alone. Break the pattern, James. Break the pattern. The numbers on his shoulder, 23-17-40. He'd assumed they were a code, a sequence, a key to understanding what was happening to him. But what if they were something simpler? Something he'd seen every day at work. File numbers. The Morrison account. 3 months ago, he'd found something in the numbers, a pattern of transactions that didn't make sense. But before that there had been other accounts. Other patterns. Other versions of himself finding other pieces of the same puzzle. He needed to get back to the office. His pursuers would expect that. They'd be waiting. Unless. Break the pattern, he muttered to himself. Every time he ran. Every time he hid. Every time he tried to solve it alone. James pulled out his phone and called the one number he'd been avoiding. Sarah answered on the first ring. I told you not to. The dreams, he cut her off. They're not dreams. They're memories. And I need you to remember, Sarah. Really remember. 3 months ago, did I tell you something? Something about work? The silence on the line stretched so long he thought she'd hung up. Then, barely a whisper, you said they were hiding something. That the numbers didn't add up. That people had died. A flash of memory, not his own, but another James's, bodies found in apparent accidents, suicides that didn't quite make sense, all connected by a web of financial transactions so complex it had taken multiple versions of himself to start seeing the full picture. And then what happened? You disappeared. Her voice cracked. Just like the other times. Just like, she broke off with a sharp intake of breath. Oh God. I remember. I remember all of it. They're not just dreams, are they? All those different versions of you, trying to tell me something, trying to make me understand. Sarah, I need your help. I can't do this alone. That's the pattern, every time I try, they catch me, they reset everything, and it starts over. But you remember. Parts of you always remember. They're watching me, she whispered. They have been since the first time. I see them sometimes, pretending to be neighbors, delivery people. I know. But they're watching for me to come to you. They're not watching your husband's office. Another silence. Then, Robert's building. 36th floor. 1 hour. Sarah. Just, be careful. And James? The box. The one you gave me last time. I kept it. I don't know why, but I kept it. The line went dead. James checked the time, 4:52 p.m. The sun would be setting soon, casting long shadows between the buildings. Perfect for losing tails, for becoming just another suit hurrying home from work. His phone buzzed one last time. Interesting. Finally learning, aren't you? But so are we. He turned the phone off and dropped it in a passing garbage truck. They could track him, but they'd have to work for it now. And for the first time, perhaps the first time across all his iterations, he felt something new. Hope. The Meridian Solutions building loomed ahead, its glass facade reflecting the orange glow of sunset. Mike the security guard would be changing shifts now, handing over to the night guy who was always more interested in his phone than the monitors. The service entrance would be busy with cleaning crews arriving, deliveries finishing up. Just enough chaos to slip through if you knew the patterns. And James knew them all, not just from his own memories, but from every version of himself that had worked in that building. He checked his wallet again, spreading out the various IDs. Different names, different faces, all with subtle variations of his own features. Not just alternate identities, alternate Jameses, each one a snapshot of another attempt to uncover the truth. Thomas Richardson. Michael Chen. David Foster. Each one had gotten a little closer, each one had left behind fragments of memory, pieces of the puzzle. And somewhere in the building above, in file number 23-17-40, was the proof that would break more than just his personal cycle. Unless that's exactly what they were waiting for. James looked up at the darkening sky, then at his watch. 45 minutes until he was supposed to meet Sarah. Time enough to make it to Robert's office, but not if he stopped at Meridian first. He had to choose. The numbers on his shoulder seemed to burn, 23-17-40. The file that had started it all. Or had it? Was that just another false memory, another breadcrumb laid out to lead him down the same old path? Break the pattern. He turned away from the Meridian building and headed for the subway. Behind him, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, and the city's lights began to flicker on like stars. The subway car rattled through the darkness beneath the city. James sat with his back to the corner, watching the other passengers, looking for the telltale signs he'd learned to recognize across multiple lifetimes, the too steady grip on a newspaper, the carefully casual way of not making eye contact, the slight bulge of a concealed weapon. But his attention kept drifting to his reflection in the scratched subway window. How many times had another version of himself made this same journey? How many times had he thought he was finally on the right track, finally about to break free of the cycle? The box Sarah mentioned. What was in it? He had no memory of giving it to her, but that didn't mean anything anymore. His memories were a palimpsest, layers upon layers of different attempts, different approaches, different failures. At 34th Street, half the car emptied out. A woman in a red coat got on, sat directly across from him. There was something familiar about the way she held herself, the angle of her chin. She looked up, met his eyes, and smiled. "Hello, James," she said. "Or is it Thomas today? Michael?" It's so hard to keep track. His muscles tensed, ready to run, but she shook her head slightly. "That's not necessary. Not this time. You're finally doing something interesting." "Who are you?" "Someone who's watched you fail many, many times." She crossed her legs, smoothed her coat. "But also someone who's been hoping you might eventually succeed. You're one of them." "Them? Us?" "The lines aren't as clear as you think, James. Just like your memories, just like your identity, everything bleeds together eventually. That's what makes you so fascinating. Most people, when we edit them out, they stay edited. But you." She smiled again. "You leave traces. Little fragments that survive each reset. Like water wearing away stone, you're slowly creating cracks in the system." The train slowed for the next station. She stood up. "The box you left with Sarah? Don't open it. Not yet. You're not ready for what's inside. But keep it. You'll know when it's time. Wait. Break the pattern, James. But remember, sometimes the pattern isn't what you think it is." She stepped off the train just as the doors were closing. Through the window, he watched her walk away, her red coat bright against the station's gray walls. She didn't look back. James checked his watch, 5:40 p.m. 5 minutes until he was supposed to meet Sarah. His heart was pounding, but his mind was clearer than it had been all day. The woman in red had given him something without seeming to, confirmation. This wasn't just about corporate fraud or financial crimes. This was about something bigger, something that could edit people out of reality itself. And he wasn't the only one trying to fight it. Robert's building was all glass and steel, its upper floors lost in the gathering darkness. James walked in through the revolving doors, past the security desk where a guard was deeply engrossed in his phone, just as he'd known would be the case. The elevator was waiting, as if someone had called it for him. Sarah was waiting too, in her husband's empty office on the 36th floor. She looked smaller than he remembered, more fragile, but her eyes were clear and determined. "I remember more now," she said without preamble. "Each time you come back, I remember more. It's like, Like a wall breaking down, bit by bit. She placed a small metal box on the desk between them. You gave me this last time. Said not to open it unless you failed again. James stared at the box. It was perfectly plain, no markings, no seams visible. Did you open it? No. But I dream about it sometimes. About what might be inside. About why it feels so heavy for its size. She pushed it toward him. It's yours. Or, the other yous. Or maybe all of them. He reached for it, then stopped, remembering the woman in red's warning. Not yet. You're not ready. Keep it, he said. Keep it safe. There's something I have to do first. Sarah's eyes widened. You're going back to Meridian. No. James smiled. That's what they expect. That's what I always do. But this time. He pulled out his wallet, laid out all the IDs. This time, we're going to find the others. Others? Thomas Richardson. Michael Chen. David Foster. They're not just aliases. They're not just other versions of me. They're out there somewhere, right now, living their lives, working their jobs, getting closer to the truth from different angles. And they're leaving traces too, just like I do. We just have to find them. Sarah looked at the IDs, then at the box, then back at her brother. You really think they're real? That they're, you? As real as I am. Which might not be very real at all, depending on how you look at it. He gathered up the IDs. But together, maybe we can. The lights went out. In the sudden darkness, James could hear Sarah's quick intake of breath, the distant wail of sirens, the hum of the city outside going silent floor by floor, building by building. A darkness deeper than night was rolling across Manhattan like a tide. James. Sarah's voice was small in the darkness. I think I remember this part too. His phone buzzed one last time. The screen's light illuminated their faces as he read the message. Clever. But not clever enough. Time to reset. Unless. The message ended there. Unless what? James looked at Sarah, at the box, at the city drowning in darkness outside the windows. He had a choice to make. And somewhere, in another version of reality, another James was waking up to find that no one remembered him. But this time would be different. This time, he wasn't alone.